Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tech Shop. There's a few seats up here if anyone wants to join us in some of the front rows. Have a seat. Thank you for coming. For those of you who don't know, Tech Shop is a DIY membership-based workshop. We offer classes and access to equipment for people to come in and make anything. We feel like it's a great place to kick off the Mayor's Innovation Roundtable sessions. And this panel, you've got some great panelists. I'll let them go through their introductions. But we do think this is a great place to talk about makers in the manufacturing movement. We've seen what happens when you give a local community access to training, new skills, and design technology. We've had a lot of members like Dodo Case, Square, Type A Machines. You can see some of our member project samples in the back when you came in. Feel free to take a look at those after. But I just want to kick things off. Thank you for coming. If you'd like to take a tour of the shop next door, feel free after this. I know there's an event otherwise, but we're open 7 days a week. So take a look at the technology. You're going to hear about some of that today. And we welcome you to our maker community. I'd like to now turn it over to Mayor Ed Lee to kick off the session. And I forgot to mention that we do consider the mayor an official maker. He took his first class here, so I wanted to present him with a Friend of Tech Shop membership so that he can come back in and make anything that he can think of. So there you
go. Well, Carrie, thank you very much. First of all, Carrie, thank you and staff again for inviting us back to Tech Shop. She was right. I was here last week, and I have proof, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. You know, what's happening in San Francisco and the Bay Area, for that matter, is incredible. We have a 5.6 unemployment rate. We have over 1,800 technology companies in the city that employ over 46,000 people. And we're on the verge of discovering relationships we've never had before that are public-private partnerships, that are exciting, that are innovative. And when you look at what's happening with everything from startups to incubators to the larger companies like Salesforce and others that have established here, you'll realize that people want to stay in the cities, in the urban setting, particularly in the Bay Area. They want to have the rich culture that we have, but they also want to create the next generation of talent. These companies started here because there was extreme talent that called themselves platform engineers and others that would help great companies like Twitter start up and stay. Now it's our job to kind of look at, okay, where do we go from here? How do we use this innovative talent to make sure that we create generations of that talent? And for me, the best gift is to have homegrown talent, that I can look at the public schools and the schools all over the San Francisco and the Bay Area and discover that the talent is right there. And that's where I wanted to begin, because this little model, it's the first of an elaborate portfolio that I'm putting together for these panelists so that I can be hired in my next lifetime. But it's my first sample, and I have to tell you the story. 4 kids, middle school age kids, that is kids in 6th or 7th and 8th grade, taught me how to make this. And in 15 to 20 minutes last week, I came to the tech shop, went on the computers, didn't know what the heck I'm doing, and they allowed me and helped me drag down the right icons. Some were set already on the bars, and others I had to create with 3-dimensional talent, and they taught me how to do it. And then we dimensioned it, we designed it, we 3D'd it, all on the computer in about 15 to 20 minutes with 4 kids teaching me. I'd take 4 teachers full-time for 20 minutes. And then we put it to the 3D printer that were Type A printers that one of the companies are here on the panel. And it began to print out. And if you don't see it from where you're sitting, it says, Golden State Warriors, Mayor Ed Lee. Talk about the future. This is simply an example of where technology and innovation is taking what we describe as the maker manufacturing movement in San Francisco. That when design, prototyping, and creative innovation all match together in a great city like San Francisco, that's the question we put forward, is how do we sustain that talent and grow it? And how do we use this opportunity not just to sit on our laurels and say Twitter is a great company, let's watch them grow, or Zynga, or Zendesk, or Autodesk, and others, but we want to actually create the talent and then take them to the next generation of these companies. So they'll be like the second or third generation of Salesforce. They have thousands of employees here who want to live and work here, and they also want to create the talent here. And they see the education institutions supporting them, they see local government and their policies supporting them, and then they in turn use their philanthropic genius and talent, and they reward us with more investments in our schools, just like what we announced this morning with Salesforce Foundation that gave $2.7 million to get iPads into our schools, but also get the training and the support mechanisms together. This is that wonderful circle that I think innovations is going to bring us. And so we're back here really to ask companies, how do we create the talent pool? What do we need to do to sustain this unemployment rate, to go down further, to get to the additional 30,000 people that are unemployed, whether they're returning veterans or whether the new arising kids from our public schools? How do we get them involved and sustained in all of the success that we're seeing today? This is a job of the mayor, the board of supervisors, and all the business talent today. I suggest to you that we cannot sit on our laurels. This is a time when we say we're going to do the things to prevent any time ever in the future we talk about a bubble bursting. If we do these right things, there will be no bubble in our future. There'll just be clear, more opportunity for us to work hard and get these things done. And with that, I want to introduce to you Chris Anderson, who has been historically editor and the owner of Wired magazine, so he knows what's going on in the world of technology. But of recent, he's been the CEO of 3D Robotics, and this, again, is part of the entities that are helping us discover the future of advanced manufacturing in our cities, where it takes place no longer in the big steel mills with the polluting air, but manufacturing is going to take a completely different road, and I suggest it has to do with a lot of the technology talent that we're seeing today and how they blend in with good policies of good not only tax breaks, but where zoning is and where we can find space to match people who want to live in a great city and keep their innovative minds. We're lucky to be in the city, and now it's going to go beyond luck. We have to actually do the right things to keep this momentum going. And so this is a critical time period, but it's one that I suggest that we have these roundtable series of discussions with our technology leaders to blend in what we need to do and what we need to keep pace and keep focused on. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chris Anderson, 3D Robotics.
Terrific, thank you. Thank you for coming. As the mayor said, this is part of a listening tour that the point of tonight's forum is to help inform the city's policies and the mayor's staff, who are here in the audience today, about what they should be doing to help advance what we already know is a growing movement. Manufacturing is cool again. Things have changed. This is not the 1970s belching smokestacks. This is not the sort of grinding dark satanic mills that people visualize. Manufacturing today looks high-tech. It looks design-centric. It looks like everything around you. It's driven by a series of technological advances as digital manufacturing made it to the desktop and was democratized so that everybody can use them, including in the schools. It looks more like software, and yet it's in its innovation side, and yet looks like hardware when it ultimately meets the consumer. We're very fortunate today to have a number of panelists who I'll be introducing in a second. But the point again is to have a dialogue about what what the future manufacturing looks like in the Bay Area, to get your questions, and the mayor's staff is going to listen, take notes, and hopefully put it into place. So I think I'm just going to start from the left with Saul Griffith, the founder of Other Lab, and Saul, a little bit about yourself, what you're doing here in San Francisco, and maybe your number one topic for discussion tonight.
So Other Lab is
The microphone's right in front of you.
Cool. My booming voice is not enough. Other Lab is an independent R&D lab in San Francisco. Our product, in some respects, is new technology companies. We're spinning out a new robotics company making completely soft and conformal robotics. A company that makes CNC machines using CNC machines, so robots making robots. And we are doing automated manufacturing of bicycles, and then we have 2 large-scale clean energy projects, one in utility-scale solar and one in energy storage and natural gas for transportation. Why are we doing it in San Francisco? It's not easy. The reason we are here is for the talent. The mayor is 100% correct on that. We are not here because of the war the city wages on parents and schools and children. That actually is difficult, and a lot of our talent, as soon as they have children, moves out of the city. That's one of the number one challenges, I think. But we also, I believe strongly that there are 2 types of things that this sort of revolution in manufacturing will do. Precision has become enormously cheap. That's really what's underlying of this. It's not 3D printing, it's not CNC, it's that precision is now incredibly cheap, as is control. So that means that manufacturing processes look like software. There are still smokestacks, they are elsewhere. So for cities like San Francisco and urban centers, the opportunity is in taking these robotic, software-controlled, robotic manufacturing cells and producing highly personalized, super high-quality products in the city for the residents. And I think that is a huge opportunity, and I'm very interested in that as a general trend.
The next panelist is Kate Sophus, who is the executive director of SF Made, which is the association, I guess, or organization that represents this growing class of San Francisco-based manufacturers.
Great. Hi. I think for us, so we've been existing as an organization for close to 4 years. We started by really just organizing 12 of the existing manufacturers who are here in the city, who were, for the most part, decidedly very low-tech. And fast forward to today, we have almost 500 now manufacturers in the city, and they're this very interesting ecosystem of companies, like many that were sitting at the panel today, who are younger than we are, who are infusing digital desktop manufacturing, additive manufacturing into their process. And for every one of those, we also have traditional, what feels like more traditional kinds of making going on, garment manufacturing, food and beverage manufacturing. So I'm interested really in 2 things as it relates to sort of new and older school manufacturing. One is, how do we help some of the older school companies who are still not belching smokestacks, but are small, nimble, often do personalized, customized production, but they are laggards in adopting some of the new digital desktop kinds of manufacturing? I think that's one challenge. The other challenge is, a maker does not mean you're a manufacturer, meaning that we have this immense creativity coming out of a city like this of makers and hackers and people inventing things. And the next step is, how do we take the subset of those that are really commercially viable and can be done at scale, whether that's done here or it's done in another part of the US long term? How do we help more entrepreneurs make that leap, make it successfully, and design in a way that it's possible to economically make things stateside?
Thank you. Before I get to the next panelist, I just want to remind everybody this is a conversation. Your questions can come either by raising your hand or by submitting it via Twitter through the hashtag #InnovationMonth. So again, that's hashtag #InnovationMonth. Somebody will be following that hashtag and bringing me those questions. So as soon as we finish with the panel, we'll bring in the audience as well. Our next panelist is Kate Terrain, the other Kate. Kate's with Indiegogo, and I mentioned how one of the important catalytic moments of the maker movement, which is basically the web generation, the web's innovation model meets the real world. In addition to the desktop digital prototyping, there was crowdfunding. And Kate's with Indiegogo, which is one of the leading crowdfunding sites. This recognition that there's a way to bring consumers into the financial model of innovation and manufacturing at the beginning of the process rather than the end is probably as important as the digital technologies themselves, and has liberated an extraordinary amount of entrepreneurship and innovation that never would have made it through traditional funding models. So Kate, tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what you're doing here in San Francisco.
Thanks. Oh, wow, that was a great intro. I'm like, can I keep you around for every intro I need? Excellent. Hi, I'm Kate Drain, and I work at Indiegogo, which is, as Chris mentioned, that it is a leading crowdfunding platform that is based here in San Francisco, actually right around the corner. We were founded here in January 2008, and in that time we have seen so much innovation and so many companies to come to life through our platform. Every week, at any given time, you can see 7,000 campaigns that are live, and we're distributing millions of dollars every week, and it's incredible. Also, for me, I'm a small business owner, and I own a business that we started in San Francisco and we moved to Belmont, but it's called the Can Van, which is a mobile beer canning service for craft breweries. So we roll around the Bay Area with our canning line and canned beer for small breweries. So we make it possible, and many of our clients are here in San Francisco. We actually got our start on Indiegogo, which is how I learned about the company and how I get to sit here today. And so what we're doing in San Francisco and what we have been doing from the beginning is empowering people to fund what matters to them. Our founders, when they set out 5.5 years ago, wanted to make sure that anybody who had a great idea and found an audience that cares and was able to connect with them in a real and authentic dialogue and way, that should be the thing that empowers and funds and gets great ideas off the ground. There shouldn't be gatekeepers. There shouldn't be somebody saying, yes, this is something that can be funded, or no, this shouldn't. This should be up to the people. The people should be able to make it happen. And I'm so proud to have seen how much it's grown. So just when I started 15 months ago, and I was employee 22, and now we're right around 60. And it's just amazing to see so that's a demonstration of our growth, to show that it is astronomical when you give the people the power and the tools to make things happen for themselves, what they can make possible. And I'm floored. We had a campaign recently raise $13 million through our platform for a smartphone. We had a campaign raise $2 million for an amazing home security device called Canary. People are making real money, and there's a lot of them in San Francisco, and I'm so proud to just be part of it and be part of the community.
Thank you, Kate. One other announcement. I want to mention that this room is just one of two. There's another room over at the hub where 120 people are right now watching the video cast and audio. And we're going to be joining them afterwards for a happy hour. So instructions on how to get there and to mingle and socialize afterwards will come at the end of this series, which is going to be at 6:30. The next panelist, I wanted to introduce Andrew Rudder, who is the CEO of Type A Machines. Type A Machines was founded and is run right here in Tech Shop, or rather right there in Tech Shop. They make 3D printers and are a perfect example of a company that's kind of really right on the verge between having started in the maker movement and now industrializing to be a normal, big, thriving company. Andrew, tell us more.
So it started off with me having a 3D printer that I was disappointed with, and I ultimately ended up building a completely new one, and then people offered me money. And so I said, yeah, sure, why not? And that was about 2 years ago now, year and a half, 2 years. And yeah, we're up to 18 members of staff. We're moving out because we physically don't fit inside Tech Shop anymore. We're about to roll out the new generation machine, and it's great in that kind of looking at the giant mountain that you're going to run up kind of way, and it's terrifying and fantastic.
Andrew, if I'm not mistaken, you were the second company to be kicked out of Tech Shop for being too successful. Is that right?
I understand so. Yes.
Dodo Case was the first. Yeah, exactly. Finally, our last but not least panelist is Robbie Shingler from Planet Labs, who does rocket science, among others, and we share an investor. So Robbie, tell me a little bit more about your background and what you're doing here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we at Planet Labs design, build, and manufacture Earth observation satellites, and this is just 3 blocks away from here. We put these satellites in space, and we take pictures of the planet. In December of this year, we're going to launch the world's largest Earth observation constellation of 28 satellites. And this is going to allow us to get a constant insight into the changing planet around us. It has a lot of commercial utility as well as humanitarian and environmental utility. But from the standpoint of manufacturing and why we're here and makers, there was actually our shared investors, OATV, O'Reilly Alpha Tech Ventures, and they had a really good blog post on makers going pro. And similar to most people in their garage, we were doing the same thing, except our garage was down in Cupertino because we worked at NASA. We started prototyping and building a satellite in our garage because we knew that we could build satellites a little bit differently than we could if we can take risk the way that we wanted to. Then when it got to a point of turning it into a real company and receiving some venture capital funding, we moved to San Francisco because this is where we went every weekend. This is our culture, this is our community, this is who we are. So we moved up about a year and a half ago on 2nd and Bryant, and we're up to about 40 people. And it's going to be a very exciting year ahead.
Thank you. So I wanted to just broaden it a little bit because I'm actually not based in San Francisco. I'm based in Berkeley, and Stephen Golden, my friend and landlord, is in the audience as well. And I'm recognizing that San Francisco is not competing with Berkeley and not competing with Oakland. We are competing with the other, if you will, new manufacturing hubs around the country. This is, it is ironic that, the biggest perhaps concentration of quote unquote makers is in Brooklyn, which you don't think of as a low cost manufacturing center. Why is that? And the answer is because New York has the highest density of design schools and designers, and because manufacturing today looks like desktop stuff, looks closer and closer like software, as Saul pointed out, where it matters has a lot less to do with who has the biggest space and the best industrial zoning, and more who has the best talent and creativity and access to capital and things like that. So it's the Bay Area, I think, rather than San Francisco. And what we're competing with is not just the New York metropolitan area or San Diego or Seattle, but Shenzhen or Paris or someplace in India. This is a global competition, and the question is how is San Francisco going to capitalize on its success in high tech to do the same in the new industrial era? Let me turn to the panel, and let's start with the negative, which is, what's your biggest problem right now as manufacturers in San Francisco? What's the one thing that bothers you the most? And if you could be mayor for a minute, what would you change? Just start with Saul.
Just one.
I'm going to do one wearing 2 different hats. So as a manufacturer of things, my biggest problem and concern is not hiring the top-level engineers, applied physicists, our software programmers and PhD nerds. It is in hiring high-quality people who know how to make a high-quality product, something that you actually wouldn't want to put a warranty on and is well-finished. And those people, to do that these days, need to know how to debug CNC machines, which are really very big, very heavy, very fancy robots. So we have a gap in the manufacturing workforce in the middle, so the operators of the machines that do the actual production. So that worries me as an employer in that sense. What worries me as an individual is that these workplaces that we are creating look like they employ very high-paid people at the design end of the spectrum, and they employ some people to pack these products into boxes and ship them at the low end of the spectrum. And I think, there's no value judgment here, but it's just, this is expressing the concern that I think we are the hollowing out of the middle class. And so I worry about that, and I think, I don't think enough people actually talk about it. They don't talk about it very honestly. And if I was a mayor of a city and I was trying to figure out how to make a city that was healthy and vibrant, as San Francisco has always been a fairly egalitarian, healthy, vibrant city, this goes a little bit counter to that. So I would figure out how to get ahead of that. Having said that, I don't have the great idea.
Continuing with the mayor of the day, and again, speak into the mic because we've got an overflow room that's only hearing us remotely. But Kate, mayor for your day?
I actually agree with everything he just said, so I'll have a different one so that I get to figure out a way to add something in, but that is actually number one. Number two, right behind it, is finding space for all the wonderful manufacturers we have in the city. And it doesn't need to be massive quantities of space. I think, as you'll see in a minute, we are seeing very vibrant companies handling a lot of different opportunities in relatively small footprints, but being really creative, I think, is the operating word as a city about where we can tuck away folks and make sure that we don't just cannibalize everything we have for sort of higher rent-paying uses, so that we can continue to have this stuff here in the city to create the jobs.
I'm not a manufacturer, but if I were mayor for the day, and in terms of retaining talent, I guess that I don't know what exactly you could do for rent, but to ensure that there's equitable rent available for people here in San Francisco, because I know for myself and for my friends, just being priced out of apartments for one, and then two, not having space to actually rent, that is a problem. So that would be something that I would do.
So I would have gone with the first two, definitely. The third, I fit in my apartment. I used to live in London, which is smaller, apartment-wise. No, I think, given the options already taken, I would probably, I would find some way to get more people access to spaces like Tech Shop. I think that as people are beginning to innovate in the education spaces, where they're beginning to put CNC tools and CAD/CAM software into the hands of younger and younger people, and make them more easily available, I think there needs to be a natural progression that people need to see facilities like Tech Shop become just as ubiquitous, but hopefully much more used than a gym, basically.
On a serious note, I would probably try to really focus on education. I think that's something that Saul mentioned. He is now a father of two. I'm not a father of anybody yet, but that is a very serious problem. A lot of people, when they do have kids, they move out of the city because they can't afford the private schools here. So that's a very serious one. With respect to innovation in the city, I would play with space. Not necessarily just for manufacturers or just for office buildings, but also for residential. I think that there's a lot of innovative, interesting things that we could unleash our population on if we begin to rethink how we use our buildings that are deserted, or how we actually zone in such a way that makes it possible to be a bit more modern with what the creative people want to do with their work around them. Because a lot of people are living and working in very similar places, and there isn't really a difference between living and working anymore.
Let me be specific about space. Do one last pass around through the panel, and then I'd like to get some questions from the audience. Tell us exactly where you're located right now, and I know you're all growing. Where are you likely to move to next?
At Other Lab, we inhabit the magnificent former Schoenstein pipe organ manufacturing factory at the corner of 20th and Alabama, which is building number 101 on the San Francisco Historic Register of Buildings and is on the National Historic Register of Buildings. I'm long-winded on this because I think it is pertinent and important. It's on those historic registers because that building was specifically designed to make exactly one thing, pipe organs, highly optimized to make pipe organs. It has double-story spaces for what they call the erecting room, where you would put it together before you shipped it off to the church. Unbelievable little nooks and crannies for all of the arcane tools that you needed. There's a drawer that is in a built-in cupboard that says seldom used tools. I mean, it's an absolutely stunning, magnificent space, but it's to say this really was, and it actually manufactured pipe organs in that building up until 2011 when we bought the building. They were slow and quiet in the last few years. When we started using real machines again, that were probably quieter than the original ones, we got complaints from all the neighbors who work from home, telecommuting to Facebook that, oh, you shouldn't be allowed to manufacture in this suburban neighborhood. So, in many ways, our existing building illustrates some of the problems. It is a magnificent space. We likely will expand from that 7,000 feet into another roughly 15,000 feet. Near enough by that I won't tell you exactly what the building is because I'm still competing with bloody real estate developers for this building. But the building that we're moving into, they don't actually read history, so I know that this won't give the game away for them. It was originally the building that made all the water tanks for the city of San Francisco. So that's how we're solving our problems, but it is not cheap, and really you're just, because talent is so expensive in this town, if you express the cost of real estate as a percentage of cost of talent, it's not that bad. But if you look at it in any real sense against anywhere else in the universe, it's ridiculously expensive to do what we do in the city.
Can you say what kind of prices you've been quoted on a per square foot basis?
This is actually why I'm buying buildings now rather than renting, because effectively, right now, I'm lucky enough to be able to do so, but effectively the mortgage rate for a building is $1.25 to $1.50. The effective rental rate of neighboring buildings is $3 to $4 a foot.
So that's $1.25 on the in the buying and $3-ish.
Yeah. So.
Wow. Gosh. Okay. Kate, are you moving?
Pardon?
Are you moving?
Am I moving? No, I hope not. So we're co-located right now with Tech Shop, and we have been almost since the beginning. And we're crammed into a small space. We're not manufacturers. We're obviously kindred souls to manufacturing, and we like being in a making environment. It stimulates us, and we actually get a decent flow these days of new would-be entrepreneurs having innovative products coming through Tech Shop. And if we run out of space and if there's no more room at Tech Shop, we would probably go back to where we started, which was the equivalent of a mezzanine of one of our other manufacturers. So maybe in Saul's new building, he'll have some space if we ever run out. I think we'll always want to be co-located with manufacturers. One thing I will add is 2/3 of my staff can't afford to live in San Francisco right now. And we're just finishing up an annual survey of all of the 492 manufacturers that we do every year, and the results aren't in yet, but I can pretty much tell you that the percentage of the employee base of the close to 4,000 folks working in the sector now, of folks who are commuting in from outside of San Francisco is growing as a percentage, which I guess on the one hand, wearing my city hat, part of our mission is to really dig deep and employ local residents. Wearing a regional hat, I think the reality is we have to both balance our keen desire to see as much employment coming out of San Francisco as possible, given our nonprofit mission, but also balance it with the reality that we are a regional economy, and the reality is folks may very well, in order to be able to work at Saul's company, need to live somewhere further afield.
Can I take this opportunity to lobby you once again to redefine your mission to include the Bay Area? Any chance of that?
What we have done is a slightly different take on that, is reached out to about 32 other major U.S. cities. We've created this broad collection of folks called the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. We actually just had the second time we've ever met as a body last week in Oakland. And the coolest thing for me, outside of connecting and not competing, but trying to collaborate with Brooklyn and New York, which they identify themselves separately, just so you know. Yeah. We had Philadelphia there, Montreal there, but for me, the coolest thing is we had Fremont there, San Leandro, Oakland, Richmond, us, San Jose. And the six of us found ourselves hanging out around a table, realizing that we spent more time probably talking to colleagues in Chicago and New York than we were talking to each other. So I think that's going to be really our next step, because what's worked for us at SF Made is because we've really dug deep here. And rather than just sort of diluting that to be Bay Area made, I think the best solution will be sort of a group of us where we've each dug deep locally, but that we're really willing to collaborate with each other when it comes to helping companies like yours or yours navigate.
If I can add to that, we actually have components made for our various projects in Richmond, in Alameda, in San Jose, in Fremont, and in Burlingame. So it is really Bay Area made, which is bar made, which is pretty catchy.
Kate, you mentioned you were right around the corner. Are you going to stay there?
Yes, we just moved in April. It's our third office building in San Francisco. We started in the Richmond, we moved to 8th and Folsom, and now we're at 965 Mission. So we're happy. We really like our spot. Come visit.
Andrew, I know you're getting kicked out.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a point where you can only take up so much of the common space before people start complaining. And, it's kind of antisocial when we take up half of Tech Shop, but, what are you going to do? We're having fun. We're aiming to try and move soon. We would like to stay in San Francisco, but as you can hear, it's really difficult to find space that's affordable. Because we are so small and so new, it's also really difficult to find agreeable leasing terms. And we're highly likely to not end up in San Francisco, just because it's so difficult to find somewhere. And there's many places in the East Bay that are willing to offer the sort of flexible terms that, make it work for us.
With my Berkeley Booster hat on, can you tell us a little bit more about what those acceptable terms were?
There's things like being able to start any kind of leasing period with relatively small amounts of space, but with options to very easily extend very rapidly. If we hit the growth curve we're aiming to hit, we'll double in less than 6 months in size. We'll probably triple in size within the next 6 months. And so, we're not like an office where we can just say, well, we'll have a 3,000 square foot office, and by the end of it, people will sit on top of each other. We literally cannot do it. We can't grow that fast unless we have the space. And so it's really hard to find somebody who's got 10,000 square feet and will let you just rent 3,000 and they're happy to leave the rest of it empty for 6 months just in case you need it. But also, most places are going to want us to sign a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease. And we're going to have real trouble with that because we don't have the kind of cash reserves or the kind of credit history to enable us to do that. So those are the kind of things that we're dealing with.
How do your employees feel about this possibility?
They would much rather stay in San Francisco, but they're also, despite the fact that the majority of them actually live in the East Bay, they really like the fact that in San Francisco you are, very short distances from all sorts of stuff. And they're concerned that wherever we go to, they maintain that sort of pleasant environment to be located in.
Robbie, how about you?
Yeah, we got really lucky when we moved in on 2nd and Bryant, just a few blocks away, where our neighbor moved out after 6 months, so we punched a hole in the wall and doubled their size to 5,000 square feet. And then about 6 months ago, the other neighbor moved out, so we now have the whole floor, about 8,000 square feet, which is great for where we are right now. So it would be wonderful if we can go up in the same building and not have to, not necessarily have to move. But if we do have to move, then it would probably be somewhere in the Mission area. We want to stay close to BART. A lot of our employees do live in East Bay.
Got it. I'd like to take questions from the audience at this point, including Twitter. Again, the hashtag is Innovation Month. We have people monitoring that as well. So put your hand up. I will call on you. Don't be shy. Yes, sir. Actually, we have a microphone that we can take back there. Well, one of these, perhaps. It's got a cable. How's that going to work? A long cable.
Longish. Yeah, if you can come up here.
Perfect. Thank you. Come up to the mic. Appreciate it.
Hi, Rob, you mentioned you were able to take over spaces on either side of you. Why did they leave?
They left because they got a Series B, and they wanted a more posh office.
Well, where is the posh office? Did they stay in San Francisco? Or
they did. I think they're actually, I think it's Mission Bay, like those places by the ballpark. So I think it was about, now back to real estate. I think it went from $2 a square foot, fully serviced, to where we are right now, to what they're doing over there is, I think, around $5 a square foot.
Well, great. Thank you.
You're holding the mic rather than asking a question. Another question from the audience? If you don't ask questions, I'll have to do it myself, and we're going to get very wonky very fast. All right. Oh, yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Pat Riley with PR and Company, and we are also at 965 Mission, right around the corner, right below you, actually, on fifth floor. So my question is, has there been any intentional effort to improve the community we're in right now, the mid-market neighborhood, which, there's been intentional efforts on the part of City Hall to bring in folks like Twitter and other companies like Indiegogo and others, but I'm wondering, specifically from the makers community, what efforts do you see around elevating this community?
I should mention that we do have the mayor's staff here, and I would invite them to feel free to answer if they so choose. Otherwise, we're going to have to speak for you, which can't go well.
I think this question was for the makers, though.
Was it specifically for the, for the makers? Okay. Yes. All right.
So I'm going to say two things, and one is probably going to substantiate the fears we all have that there has been some displacement of some of the maker community out of South of Market. One of the things SF Made does among our variety of activities to support manufacturers is we actually do have a commercial real estate license, and so the reason we actually know as well and as much as we do about people's challenges finding space is we're very often the ones trying to help them find space, or in the case of mid-market, relocating them. So on the one hand, we have definitely seen a number of buildings turn our garment manufacturing sector, which is still one of the strongest in the country, is largely centered around these neighborhoods because of the historic connections to the Chinese and Chinese American communities. And so we've been able to, knock on wood, stay a little bit ahead of the curve, and we've proactively, as buildings have turned, been relocating them. Probably not what you want to hear. I guess the silver lining in that is we have been able to successfully relocate all of them so far. But that means we're putting pressure on other adjacent neighborhoods like Saul's neighborhood to take more and more manufacturers who can certainly not pay $2, $3, $4 a square foot. The second piece of that is we are starting to see more folks moving down into the Bayview, which, to me is the other neighborhood that we think a lot about in terms of employment and getting companies to do well down there. And down there, the rent prices are much more reasonable. They hover between 80 cents to $1.25 a square foot. But because of the lack of transit connectivity into those neighborhoods, we have a harder time placing folks down there. So I think transit connectivity, even if that means collaborating with our private sector friends, like Google as an example, to replicate private shuttle service to augment public transit into the Bayview would actually be a great start. The other piece, and here's, I guess, the success side, is another thing that we do at SF Made is we help our companies hire. And starting this year, through some philanthropic funding we've gotten from Chase, we've started a youth apprenticeship program called Youth Made. In the first year, we're taking 40 low-income high school kids in partnership with Juma Ventures, who's another nonprofit, awesome organization. And we are proactively placing them in paid internships at SF Made manufacturers. And I can tell you that about 30% of the first batch of kids come from this neighborhood around here. We think that program is really scalable. You could take a neighborhood approach to it, which we currently don't, but you could take a neighborhood lens and look at placing kids from this neighborhood specifically into companies in this neighborhood or the Bayview. Right now it's a citywide lens, but it's very concentrated with kids coming out of the Bayview, out of Mission, Excelsior, and out of here.
Kate wonderfully reminded me of an extremely passionate issue of mine. I believe in internships enormously, particularly in the fields of manufacturing and making things. You really need that hands-on experience to learn the trade. The real learning curve looks much more like apprenticeship than book study. To that effect, as a small company, running internships is fraught, expensive, difficult, hard, and high school interns are practically impossible unless you wish to really expose yourself. Nevertheless, I still endeavor to do high school things. If the city wanted to do one unbelievably useful and important thing, it would underwrite the insurance or whatever is required to lower the risk of taking high school interns and putting them in there. We know that we change these kids' lives. The average intern who comes to work for us typically ends up at a top-tier university on the back of the experience and the work and the recommendations they get. It makes an unbelievable difference. It's disappointing that it is so difficult and so fraught.
Yeah, okay. Kate.
I was just going to add one nice thing about this partnership with Juma is they put the kids on Juma's payroll, and Juma covers the insurance, and then they're placed out at a company. So maybe that's a step in the right direction.
There's the model.
So I have to ask a dumb question, which I should probably know the answer to, but what are the rules about high school interns right now? We just had some high school interns, and we did none of that. And in fairness, they had just graduated, so they were.
Their fingers when they leave every day. Make sure they have them all.
So can somebody give us like sort of 3 or 4 things that we should know about interns and the rules governing internships?
A couple of factoids, because I can tell you, SF made itself as entrepreneurial enough that we didn't know what we were doing either, and we actually had a machine shop not far from here 2 years ago, so well before we had this program. Basically, they came to a tech shop kind of event like this and met this awesome high school kid who was just a sophomore at the time, whose dad was a member of tech shop and kept bringing the son in, and they met. And the kid's like, I want to work in a machine shop, and he was this already super skilled kid who had learned all this stuff, and so our machinist was like, okay, great. And then I get a call 2 weeks later, do I need insurance? Do I need to pay him? And so we're kind of learning as we go. The first rule is, technically, for-profit companies should not have unpaid interns. Just so you know, putting that out there. So technically, a for-profit company should always be compensating at least minimum wage, even if it's a high school kid, even if it's someone with low skill, or that's the first. The second is, because they are technically going to be on your payroll, they technically do need to have workers' comp, which is where it can get very expensive when you try to explain to your insurance provider that you have an unskilled high school anything coming into your facility.
Using laser beams.
So that's where finding a partner who can actually put those young people on their payroll so that they can actually assume those obligations for you, and it's really spun then more as an educational opportunity as opposed to you trying to spin it as an apprenticeship, which feels more technical, is a safer way to go. And I think there are probably some ideas of ways that you could find organizations now in Berkeley to do that, and I'm happy to help you brainstorm that.
Terrific, thank you. Kate, by the way, while I had you, who is the biggest employer of your membership?
We have a few vying for the top spot, and none of them are massive. So in terms of revenue, it's still Anchor Brewers and Distillers. In terms of employee base, though, we have a bunch that are all around 150 employees, and it includes Anchor. It also includes a company that you guys may have walked by a million times and not known they're there. Our last electronics subcontract manufacturer, Lee Ma Electronics, owns a huge building on 9th and Folsom, and they're actually a terrific resource to a lot of our young companies when they come out of tech shop, because they can do electronic subcontract manufacturing up to scale, really. Here in San Francisco. Another company that we only learned about a few years ago makes private label belts for pretty much any belt you've ever bought out of Macy's or Nordstrom's. Believe it or not, is not being made in Shenzhen. It's being made in the Bayview by a company called Circa that also employs about 150 people. And then Trayer Engineering, who also has a production capacity, is about 150. So it's sort of pretty much exactly what our sector is. We've got this fashion product sector, belts that you'd never think of, electronics, food, beverage, beer is food, and engineering.
And the biggest employer in San Francisco who is not your member? I mean, I presume there's tons of manufacturers here who just didn't happen to join.
I think so. Because we're a relatively small city, we have about 90%, 95% of the actual manufacturers who have historically been manufacturers are participating SF-made members. But I think we have this new edge where we have companies that see themselves as hybrids of engineering and manufacturing who have not yet self-affiliated with the group, and I think that's a real opportunity, is to kind of really get the word. I mean, I know Type A Machines is a great example. We're literally upstairs next door to each other, and it was probably a year into when you guys were producing that we wandered over and were like, hey, what do you do? And hey, what do you do? And there you go. So I think we've grown organically, but I think we have a whole new sort of push to engage the newest sort of cutting edge manufacturers in the city.
You raised a semantic point, which is probably worth bringing up as well. We had an earlier roundtable with the mayor just before this, and one of the things that came up is the word maker. Doesn't really represent what most of us do. Many of us began as makers, and maker feels very sort of hobby and DIY and sort of tinkery and hackery. And yet by the time you get to our scale, we're manufacturing companies that are pretty much structured like traditional manufacturing companies. And are we still part of the maker industry? Are we not? At what point did that line get crossed? And it may be that even the word maker is in a sense almost eliminating the bigger companies because they don't feel that that's their community anymore. Kate, do you feel that people sort of graduate out of the maker movement?
Actually, this is the three of the core founding members of our company actually met either at or because of Noisebridge, which is a pretty iconic hackerspace. And as a result, we're the kind of people that talk a lot about things like what does maker mean. And for a while, actually, we almost started to dislike it because we wanted to sort of, we saw it and we thought, yeah, these things are great, but we want to be better than that. Like, it's awesome that you're a stay-at-home mum who's doing amazing things with embroidery. That's awesome. But I'm doing something very, very different. And it's the danger with using maker as this massive blanket term is you lose the sense that there is something beyond it. Like, you go on to be a fashion designer, or you go on to be an engineer. And maker, I think, it describes a certain mindset, and the danger is that it becomes so broad that everyone's like, oh, no, that's maker. Yeah. Whereas we were saying, no, this is a phenomenal start.
So it sort of has like an amateur connotation.
I think yes, but in a good way. But we should never be afraid to when people say, oh, are you a maker? Yes, and I'm an engineer.
Right. I think maker and makerspace as a word to inspire youth to consider jobs that aren't just software and app development is fabulous. But making manufacturing never went away. I sort of see the current maker movement a little bit like William Morris's craft revival. After the first industrial revolution, people were a little sick of what that looked like. So they said, okay, let's have more craftsmanship, more design, and William Morris and the craft revival happened. It wasn't a hugely successful movement, sadly. I think the maker movement might be similarly, I want it to be very successful, but I think the manufacturing never went away. There are people, I think the second largest hobby in North America, there are 2 million people who spend a substantial proportion of their weekends in their garage working on hot rods. And it really is like 2 million people. I classify them in the continuum of the maker movement that has been here for hundreds of centuries. To have the idea that the maker movement means particularly much more than a great headline to inspire young kids, hugely important to have a great headline to inspire young kids. That's fantastic. But I think the maker movement is, to focus on that takes your eye off what the real prize is here. The real prize is the revolution in the tools for manufacturing. Precision is now very cheap. Additive manufacturing is a distraction from the really amazing thing that's going on, which is robotics, automation, control is super cheap, and we're going to be able to make much higher quality, more bespoke, more personalized products at similar costs. And to emphasize actually what might be the economic engine that drives this. Traditional, large-scale manufacturing, there's someone who sells materials to a manufacturer. So there's a margin profit made there. Then that manufacturer makes some parts and components. They make a profit on those components. Those components go to assemblers. They build something. They make a profit. That goes to a retailer. The retailer makes a profit. The wholesaler makes a profit. The retailer makes a profit. So if they're all making 20 or 40%, 1.2 to the 5th power is a very big multiplier on the cost. What is happening now, because machines and robots and CNC machines and automation is cheap, is you can potentially buy the raw material from a supplier and have a finished product enter, and you own all of those margins. So there's way more room to build higher quality products because one entity owns all the margins. That is actually the revolution, and that's why design is unbelievably important in this, because you're going to make high value add, high quality products. And particularly if you're going to try and do this in areas like San Francisco, it's worth noting why this is going to work.
So, can you name
Can I
that
just-
revolution, please? Can you name this, please? If you don't like maker movement, do you have a better name for it?
If that has to be shoehorned under the maker movement, I think the maker movement looks like people hacking and having a huge amount of fun, and I love that. And I think that playfulness of the maker movement, the maker fairs are fabulous creative forums, but it does lack a certain rigor required to build a product with a warranty on schedule. Yeah. I hope it matures, and there's nothing wrong with one being your avocation and the other being your vocation, right? And if that actually is more like the relationship I see between advanced manufacturing and the maker movement.
Kate.
I just wanted to build off of your point for saying that the tools and the precision was cheaper. It's also cheaper to get access to capital at this point.
Oh yeah, fully, yes, unbelievable, hugely important. Thank you. Yeah.
But Kate, can you make a stab at a rebranding of the maker movement?
I know. It's funny. I think about this actually kind of a lot because I do see the spectrum. I see people who are making things like I think a lot about. So I head up our design and technology category. So anybody who posts in those categories, I work with them or I oversee it, and I see it from a spectrum where it's a maker, it's a person in their basement and they're making a hobby. They just really want to get these beautiful notebooks into the hands of people. And so they can make 50 of them and they can make them in Tech Shop. And then it graduates to the next level where you are a business owner or you have a product that you're turning into a business. And then you have a business that is taking out a product. And then you have a corporation that is trying to, like Canonical, that is trying to release a product as well. That's like the fourth category that we see. And so it's neat to see the spectrum, but no, I can't. If anybody has ideas, maybe put that at the hashtag Innovation Month.
It's funny because makers will get you onto Indiegogo, but it won't get you off, right? I mean, if you're successful, you're no longer a maker. Now you're
it's made. You're a mader.
Yeah.
There we go.
Maker to made.
Well, I want to mention my perspective on this. So I think that there are attributes of the maker movement that are phenomenal. And it does get down to the individual, that an individual can do something. They have an idea, they're curious about it, they can prototype it. There are a lot of assets out there where you don't have to invest millions of dollars in order to actually realize something that you have in your head, right? So that element of curiosity and all the tools that are available in order to make that possible is at the core and of what the maker movement is for me. So with respect to our company, when I'm talking to the FCC about getting RF licenses to communicate with satellites in space, we are, a solid company. We're not like a maker company. But then again, internally, we are curious. We are full of engineers and scientists that have tools at their disposal to prototype and hack new solutions and prototype these new solutions. As they get into manufacturing, for us to put them up into space, they are exquisite and they are very careful. So I think we would self-identify internally, culturally, as a team of engineers as being makers.
Beware, I think he's actually forcing us to answer this, so Chris has the title for his next book.
Yes, I clearly.
I have a suggestion then. The Maker Compulsion.
The Maker Compulsion. I should actually plug Mark Hatch's, the CEO of Tech Shop, where we are today. Mark Hatch has a book that came out, I think, this week called The Maker Manifesto. And if the employees here know what's good for them, that book is presumably available next door. But it's very much about this path from curiosity to commerce. Other questions from the audience, please? Yes, ma'am. There was a microphone right here.
I'll just go then.
Okay, we'll get to you next.
Sorry. So we kind of all know the stat of how, America consumes 25% of the world's resources, whatever. I'm curious as to what you guys think about how the maker movement, whatever it's called, is affecting the way people consume now and how, what the future of that holds, with kind of the trajectory of how the maker movement is going.
Can I take a quick stab on this because I just did it this weekend. So we've got my kids, I have 5 kids, and they've been growing up with 3D printers for the last 5 or 6 years. And this weekend, we made dollhouse furniture. We downloaded designs from Thingiverse, and we 3D printed, and the 5-year-old paints them. And I think it's fair to say that we will never buy a toy again. There, no more mass-produced plastic on the shelves of Walmart. Anytime the kids want to play with something or to have something, our first instinct is, can we print it? Can we find it on Thingiverse? Can we make it? So, it's still plastic, but the relationship with the plastic has changed from consumer to creator, and they love it.
So one of the things that, so everyone says 3D printing produces less waste. One of the things that we're seeing that's really interesting is actually, in many ways, it produces objects of less permanence. So in some ways, it actually produces more waste. But on the flip side, you produce consumers who are much, much more informed and care a lot more about the materials they're using. And I think this is going to be the really great change, is you're going to see consumers so much better informed, and then you're going to see the change coming from the bottom, where people actually want more sustainable processes. A lot of people, desktop 3D printers historically have used ABS, which has all sorts of issues. The majority of machines now use PLA because it's actually easier to work with, but at the same time, people are really paying attention to the fact that it's a biodegradable plastic. You don't have to recycle it. It doesn't matter if recycling is only 10%, because eventually it can rot, and people are getting much better informed about this stuff and really starting to care.
I think your question is far more pertinent than you might even think. I think these new manufacturing, these 3D printing processes, these hacking things, without question, you can say that traditional industrial manufacturing is enormously more efficient and produces far less waste than all of these prototyping processes. So, how might they produce less waste? Only if you spend a huge amount of time designing the object yourself, so that time spent designing is not spent buying other stuff. So the time invested as an activity prevents you from buying more other things. And also, if the objects that you create are of high enough quality and have enough personal relationship to you, that you start to shun the larger consumer universe, because you now realize, I want this one beautiful thing, now I've built it, I'm going to preciously hold that. It's unclear that anyone is pushing these technologies to that direction of making very high quality things. To be perfectly frank, the 3D printing material set is still extremely small, extremely fragile, and not very robust for general use. Most of them sort of self-destruct. One of the early founders of one of the main 3D printing companies, Z Corporation, actually foresaw this, and his first prototypes for the machines used rabbit skin glue and cooking flour for 3D printing, because it was entirely recyclable. It's completely feasible to use chocolate as a polymer and have a 3D printer that prints chocolate. So you can imagine a system that is actually completely recyclable. Unfortunately, all the machines we're using do not use relatively toxic, not easily recycled materials. So I think we either have to make higher quality things and love them for longer, or something needs to happen here. It is an important question.
I think that the term consumer is something that that's very impersonal, right? And part of the maker movement, if you will, is changing that relationship between who made it and then who actually uses it. And I think that that's going to be quite profound. I mean, part of what Saul mentioned about the efficiencies of cost, right? The 1.2 to the power 5, all of a sudden just going directly from the person who has the idea and the designer, and telling their story on Indiegogo, and actually making the person who's buying it, the shepherd of the product, making them feel like they're actually a part of it and the story continues. And I think that would allow for people to be more conscious and aware of what they actually do consume, and that they are part of that complete life cycle of it.
On the risk of raining on all this sunshine, which I'm inspired by, and I think that's part of the reason we live here, I think there's also the challenge, though, that so much of the rest of this country and the rest of the world relies on mass market distribution as how they connect with product. I think we see the glimmer of where we should be going, right, this transparency, but when you have entire communities in Middle America that primarily rely on Walmart not only to buy clothing and goods, but to buy groceries. I believe that having mass distribution as a structural entity is problematic in unlocking the potential of this. And I think, I just read, what was it this weekend, that, is Walmart going to adopt Made in USA? I mean, I think that's great. Walmart's adopted organic too, and I think the buying power of a place like Walmart can certainly push a few things, but what we're really talking about is a fundamental shift in the value set of Americans, that it's not about having as much as possible or having immediate gratification to be able to drive down the street to Target and get your thing, that maybe it's okay to wait a few weeks to get your machine that I learned about on the internet and I saw how it's made in a video, but you're not going to have it on the shelf of a Target. So I don't think that it's an impossibility, but I think the onus is on us to see what we can do here as an incubator of this change to push it out. But there's some structural impediments.
Exactly. I think we had some more questions in the audience here and then there and back. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to thank both Kates. One of the things, and I wanted, so with SF Made having a job board, I just think that rocks. I saw that, and talking about like real San Franciscans and the impact on them, both in an economic development sense, is amazing. Kate, I've been out with Kate on so many community events. We're talking to actual entrepreneurs and really scaling down the amount of entrepreneurs around San Francisco and in the neighborhood. My question has to go, it goes to both of you and anyone else that can answer this, is how do we scale this type of entrepreneurship in places like where we're talking about Bayview, and not just a bunch of folks relocating to Bayview, but those folks in Bayview becoming the entrepreneurs that are here at Tech Shop, that are across the way where I am at the hub, and really being able to, to take advantage of these wonderful resources and looking at access to capital, and then being able to work with the city on permitting and business licenses and things of that nature.
I just want, Carla, you have some good ideas. Like, I feel like you have, we can answer too, but I feel like you have some really good, I would like to hear from you first. Not to, yeah, I'm going to put it back on you.
This is one of my best friends from home in San Diego, Jay Corrales, and what we've been working on is talking about the innovation economy and how does it scale, and really scale for the people in the cities. And one of our latest ventures is really being able to tie that together so that you have a package. Like when someone calls you at SF Made, that there's city services, that you have to have your permitting, you have to have your business license, and then that there's access to capital that's right away, and being able to put that together. So, what if I called you and I'm someone in the Bayview, what could I get from you at SF Made to better kind of plug into the ecosystem?
There's so many. There's so much thought right now, and has been obviously for a while going into the Bayview, and we certainly don't have all the answers. I will say one of the challenges, we're really set up, since we've been talking maker manufacturer, to start working with folks when they're almost a manufacturer, meaning they've got a product, they ideally have a business plan, they've taken a few steps forward. And I think one of the fundamental challenges in the Bayview is it starts a lot earlier than that. And, we are ill-equipped to help earlier than that. Although there's other organizations, but, I'm not going to give you that. There are others, and they can help, right? I do think the power of place, if you could emulate a tech shop and plunk it down in the Bayview, that would be actually a good start, right? Because I do think that there's something special that happens.
And make it free.
Yeah.
Speaking from personal experience, if I hadn't had access to Tech Shop, the company wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
So that's a good way. Put a Tech Shop there and make it free.
And then I want to hand this to Saul, because in the mayor's session, I also have 2 young kids in elementary school in the school district, and one is special needs, and I think will be a maker for a lot of reasons, including her brain is just literally wired differently. And I want to know if there's opportunities for her. So when I think about kind of schooling the next maker force, if you want to think of it as that. Saul's point is, it doesn't start in high school, it doesn't even start in middle school, it starts right from the very beginning. And I don't know if you want to share a couple of your thoughts.
I think you just said I believe in child labor.
Which incidentally I do. I think actually, I think all of us need to feel useful. I think part of the reason the maker movement has a lot of emotive power is because it enables people to feel like they're doing something useful, make something useful. Hopefully they turn that into useful companies that create employment, etc. I believe that kids need to feel useful too, and they love to be employed in that activity. So I do believe that we should start, they don't have to make stuff for for-profit companies, Kate. I know the labor laws too. But I think maybe the point that Kate was talking about, so we were on a program, ill-fated because of the problems with DC at the moment, to develop a nationwide curriculum for high schools to put, 1,000 high schools we were going to put in modern CNC machines, 3D printers, mills, CNC mills, and something like a laser cutter, and have actual curriculum that aligned with the new Common Core standards, so that quite literally we would take all of schooling, which traditionally has been two-dimensional, like either a blackboard or a whiteboard and a piece of paper, to make a three-dimensional artifact that could potentially help with the intuition around any piece of curriculum. And I think to imagine that school could go there would be really powerful. Do I really think that we have a great opportunity to reform schools? I think reforming schools is way harder than just dropping technology in. So even though I want that experiment to be run, I really believe in that for schools. It might just be the ill-fated sort of, early one laptop per child was going to solve all the educational problems. I worked on it, and I'm one of Nicholas's, army trying to help, but still I don't think that is the only answer. I think far more interesting maybe to think about how people get hired in the contemporary world. Certainly in my office, we hire people to their portfolio, not to their, resume, if that makes sense. So we looked at what have you actually done, what have you actually built, how have you exhibited real skills in the real physical world. So you're much more likely to get an internship with me if you restored an 1959 Volkswagen bus rather than you top scored at Stanford Design School. Right? One has actual physical skills ready to hit the ground. I believe probably the biggest revolution that would make the biggest difference across the board would be moving the assessment of kids across the nation in all grades to portfolio-based assessment rather than test-based assessment. That far more meshes with the modern economy that's super dynamic. You can get far more important people. So I think all of the above and as early as you can as regards education.
Okay, we have 2 more minutes. I think that's time for 2 more quick questions. Stephen, you up?
My name's Steve. I'm from Berkeley, so my question is related to regionalism. We have a lot of makers in the East Bay. It would be wonderful to find ways to have better communication and to work well with San Francisco. So my question would be, how can we, what are a couple things we can do to feed back and forth? And as a backdrop to that question, when you look at the scale of what's happening at a place like Shenzhen, what's the population of Shenzhen? I've never been there. How are their streets laid out? How is the economy? What's the magnitude of the problem? And then can we really afford, it's so easy for us to think based on bus routes and how we live our daily lives, we have to get out of that. So again, how do we act more like a region?
I think it's an abject fail if we end up looking like Shenzhen.
It's what?
It's an abject failure if we end up looking like Shenzhen, having done manufacturing at scale there. I'm completely with Chris. Don't call it, East Bay versus the city, etc. It should be the Bay Area. But in our office, on a daily basis, we are working with people in Boston. We are working with people in Washington. We're working with people in New York. We're working with people in Asia. It's already even beyond Bay Area. More than half my employees, and someone else here said the same, are commute from the East Bay, the South Bay, or the North Bay. Sadly, to the mayor's point of, you should hire people who would train and learn in the city, I actually, when he said that, I went through all roughly 35 people we had. I don't think anyone was born or grew up in the city of San Francisco who works in our office, so we're completely imports. So I kind of understand your question. I think it may be too late. It's bigger than that already. Honestly, just the video, the cheapness and the availability of video conferencing and tools like GitHub make it so easy to collaborate across time and space. I'm not sure it's really a geographic issue. So I think people are going to hire. The reason we're in San Francisco is you get the best talent here. It's a magnet city. But it's not a great place, and nor will it ever be to do at-scale manufacturing. So there's always going to be those conflicts.
That's a great point. Actually, I want a quick show of hands. How many people in this room were born in San Francisco? All right, 4. How many people went to college in the Bay Area? Good. And so I presume all the rest of you are the imports that sold this drug. Oh, well, fair point. Kate asked, how many people have children who were born here? Okay.
How many people are worried about the lottery system for schooling in San Francisco?
Oh my God. All right, I think we have time for one more question, or barely time. Was there one more question? I think, yes? Oh, can you just actually walk up to the mic, right here? Right there. Oh, did you have a question? You did not.
Oh, I have one.
Yeah, right here.
So I think one question I would like to ask you, technology has made production much easier, and you've also talked about financing, making these more viable. If you could ask the city of San Francisco what policies would enable that, what would make it easier, either at the city level or at the national level, what are some of the barriers that are in the policy side that you would want to remove? What would it be?
Access to affordable space is certainly our biggest problem in the city.
Take anything that a Republican would say about easier employing conditions. I'm not really a Republican, but I often, when I think about my business self, and I pay too much payroll tax and all of the above, I want more favorable business conditions. But education, I think America went from, without doubt, the best education system in the world, maybe the 60s and 70s, to pretty much god-awful now. You still have the best college system in the world, and your graduate schools in America are unbelievable. Quality of someone who comes out of the graduate schools here is astounding, but you've lost all the advantage early on. So national level, huge amount of investment in education is required. A lot of the work that we do at Other Lab is in the energy space. Consistent energy policy would make an unbelievable difference. At the scale with which you would wish to affect the American economy, one of the only revolutions that is going to create the jobs and the economy that you would like is going to be the transfer from a carbon-based economy to a non-carbon-based economy. And thanks. There's going to be an awful lot of advanced manufacturing in that, and we don't have consistent policies that really enable that. We similarly have dysfunctional policies on robotics and healthcare technologies that make it difficult to make those things. So I think things that are much bigger even than the maker movement in terms of really impacting the economy, we still are not having consistent technology policy.
So as a carbon-based life form, I'm concerned about your prescription. I think I take your point.
You'll be replaced by a robot. I would add 2 quick things. One is, sort of at a national level, a very simplistic level, and I talk to legislators who aren't working in Washington currently. There's this rhetoric of sort of a protectionist approach to Make It in America, and I think it's time we kind of reframe that debate. I'm obviously for making things here, but it's a global economy, and when you look at the parts and supplies, and having protectionist import policies may seem like a good idea until they're hurting the very small manufacturers you want to help because you're hybrids and you're using parts from all over the world. So that's one. The other, going back to education, I would like to see half of the budget that's currently spent in the Department of Commerce on this and that grant program that don't go anywhere be redeployed into a national apprenticeship program that would deploy funds directly to small businesses who are the ones in turn taking on at-risk, low-income folks and youth and immigrants and giving them on-the-job training. That's what I'd like.
Terrific. Kate Sobis for the next mayor of San Francisco for more than a day. Before I say thanks to our panel, I wanted to give you instructions to what is written here in big letters, free wine. This is the after party, or the cocktails at the Hub. That's 925 Mission. Here are the instructions. You go left on Howard, left on 5th, and left on Mission. So that's like 3 blocks away. Or through the alley. Or through the alley. Anyway, it's 2-3 blocks, 925 Mission, free wine. Please join me in thanking our panel.
See you all at the hub.